Welcome to the Singularity Syndicate podcast, where we bring together leaders, researchers, innovators, and intellectuals to discuss transformative technologies shaping our future. I'm Najah Faisal. Hi, Jad. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Najah. Thank you for having me.
So, we've known each other over 10 years when you were working in public relations and I was working in advertising. It's like the world coming full circle, and now you are a DEI specialist. So tell me how that journey came about.
Yeah, for sure. When I was back in Lebanon and then working for Dubai and Saudi Arabia, I was mostly in PR and advertising and doing some multicultural marketing work. And while I was working for the Dubai market, I had more exposure to different audiences, different multicultural audiences. And I started strategizing to do my master's at an institution where I can learn more about global culture, understanding more of different communities, different narratives, different stories. So I decided to pursue my master's at Parsons, the New School in New York City. And I figured New York would be a great place to learn more about the global culture and be exposed to different communities. And when I was there, I produced a film as my thesis about global culture and global diversity. It's now live on Amazon Prime Video called Once Upon a Color. I also worked in media localization as an account manager, as a strategic account manager, but also started teaching cross-cultural communication and started doing some freelance work on like talks and panels and understanding the DEI landscape in America, but also being an immigrant who comes from a mixed background, speaking different languages, being Arab with partial Caribbean roots myself, and being immersed in multiple communities. So DEI for me has become more from a global lens, and I wanted to amplify global inclusion within the US spectrum, where the United States, companies in the US tend to focus more on the American diversity without the understanding of foreign experiences. So I figured that was my key into coming into it. And one thing led to another, connections here and there, being part of events. I finally started my own consulting agency, if you want. I'm a solo person and I do public talks, curriculum design. I teach college and I work with multiple organizations such as the Center for Civil Rights, where we do workshops on different topics around DEI, such as microaggressions, inclusive leadership, understanding the lessons of history and how to adapt them into modern day business practices. So, and here I am today.
Was there any specific event that kind of inspired you to venture into that field? Or just like it grew through opportunity?
I was very intentional about my story, my personal story, and my narrative. And I started finding myself in different spaces where people wanted to learn about that perspective and that narrative that I had. So, meeting people introducing you to other things. I think my film was the turning point. When I produced my film and I realized how powerful it is, I was convinced like this is what I want to do. I want to talk about cross-cultural stories, cross-cultural narratives, and the intersection of cultures with each other in the US landscape. So I became very purposeful about pursuing that area of expertise.
So when it comes to generative AI, when you first learned about ChatGPT being released, tell me your first impressions.
So first impression is like, yes, machine taking over human. And I believe in human-centric approaches, not robotic or systemic approaches. And technology can be dangerous, but it also can be useful. Same thing when, Instagram started improving, and then Twitter, now X. So now, recently, I use ChatGPT for certain curriculum design, and then I adapt them accordingly. For me, like you generate a prompt, but then you modify it and you finesse it to make it your own. So right now, my mindset when it comes to AI tools is you don't own me, but I lead you mentality. Like you provide me what I want, but it's what I want, and I'm leading it the way that I want. So I'm going to keep on refining the product that you give me to make it valuable for what I'm trying to do, whether it's a presentation, a product, a paper, um, a formatted document. I start replacing words with words that I use. I think AI technology is really great as long as people understand that you cannot allow it to do the whole work for you. You need to make sure you are leading that technology and understanding that it doesn't write the story. You write a story. It just gives you that draft, and then you utilize it however you want, you know? So we have to think, I think of AI technology as like we lead it, it doesn't lead us, and it shouldn't be controlling us.
I love that. And when it comes to DEI, since the beginning of that ChatGPT release and all the other tools that followed, there's always been questions about diversity, equity, inclusion within these systems. Like,
Mhm.
I'm sure you heard about ChatGPT would give you certain answers when you tell it, tell me a joke about white people, but then when you tell it, tell me a joke about black people, and it tells you something else. And even the recent Gemini release, they had to pull out the image generation because it's creating racial problem. When you think about DEI in the context of these large language models, and knowing that these models will soon be mediating our information diet. So when
Mm.
it comes to a technology that's going to be so powerful in the future, where it's going to be like a filter between you and the information that you can get, what do you think about the biases and the things that matter to the DEI landscape?
Of course. Well, let's trace back a little bit into thinking, well, who created these modules? Who created this model or this systemic program? I always link it back. I tend to be a little bit radical, here and say that, like, we are in a world that is dominated by cisgender, white, able-bodied, heterosexual males who usually are CEOs and company owners and executive leaderships. You see it in many companies, you see it around the world. The typical CEO, as we've known or learned, is like a white, able bodied man, white American or white European able bodied man. So if you think about it, who created ChatGPT, I mean, you can tell what the answer is. It wasn't created by people of the marginalized majority. It wasn't, created by people like us necessarily. We got into it and we step in the game to get ahead. So it naturally will be biased from the get-go because, if you look at companies nowadays, who they hire, they like to hire people who look like them. Some companies who have a big standing tend to be more white dominated, right? So now DEI, from one hand, is a practice and a mindset of like making, companies more diverse, giving leadership to more black and brown people of the marginalized histories. So when it comes to ChatGPT, and there was an experiment done by a colleague of mine called Christy Lira, and they asked Midjourney, please provide me 7 headshots of a CEO, a COO, executive leader, an HR manager, and a chief directing officer. And they generated images of all similar looking, white or fair skinned looking men. And it was men, no women, no people of color, no black, no brown, no indigenous, no Arab or Latin or, Asian. But it's mostly, like the typical fair skin look, right? So you can tell that there's bias in this technology, right? It didn't generate a black CEO, while there are a lot of black American CEOs, or a lot of West African CEOs, they are, Lebanese or Egyptian or Brazilian, CEOs, out there as well, but for the majority of it all, it's predominantly white men. So naturally, the system is biased, right?
Right.
So if you think about it that way, right now, people of the marginalized communities, of the global majority, are creating their own systems to make it more diverse, right? And think about it also this way: when we generate images, like give me an image of someone who lives in Ghana, why is it automatically like a tribal image and not someone who just has a suit and tie? So these biases of country specific, someone who lives in China or someone who lives in Vietnam, they always show those media stereotypes automatically instead of showing something different. While if you tell them, show me a picture of a regular girl playing with a toy, they will show a little white girl playing a toy in a castle maybe or something.
I want to push back though on this idea that because the leaders are typically white male men, there's another argument that says it's because of the data set. Which what I'm trying to say here, and this is really also inspired by my speech to a conference recently in LA about open source technology. And I mentioned that, do we want an AI to be an accurate representation of the data or of the facts on reality on the ground, or do we want a wishful thinking AI? Meaning by, if you go to Google right now and you say, what are the percentage of female CEOs? And the percentage is anything between like anything 8 to 15%. Okay. And this is the fact of life, where if you go to the same Google and you go to images and you put the word CEO, it will give you a balance between male and female CEO, kind of 50-50 kind of ratio. But the 50-50 ratio is a factual representation. Maybe that's what we want as a society. We want to empower, for example, women or the different racial minorities. But the fact on the ground, I mean, AI is a representative of the data. It's basically a statistical prediction machine. So what do you think about that different argument?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the data is also subjective to what it wants to show. The data is showing factual things, but it doesn't collect everything around the world. So yes, absolutely. I think it shows facts, and these facts are there. And it's up to the person. Do we want to improve? Do we want to diversify? Do we want to show those hidden data that are existent, but they have never been incorporated into the system, right? So if you think of like, data collection from the get-go, most of the data collection comes from particular places that are favorable to those who are collecting the data. Now, if they want to collect data towards from marginalized experiences, they will collect them towards negative bias, like, single fathers are predominantly black and brown, and not white. But technically, if you look at America, there's a lot of new organizations, new companies collecting these small data and realizing actually in a 2016 report, the number one individual who tends to be mostly single father are white males, right? But you don't hear about it because throughout history, we've only taken the facts. And also when we take the facts, we take what we want. There's definitely a lot of factors here, but I do agree with you. The representation of this world is how you said
Skewed.
it. Yes. So
Yes.
if you ask me, wishful thinking, well, change management. Do we want to change or do we not want to change? That's the question.
Yeah. I think, what the big AI companies are trying to do right now, they're trying to what they regulate AI. They're trying to make regulation. Well, some of the regulations are needed. I think what they're trying to accomplish is that, okay, they've built this transformative, cutting edge technology, and they want government intervention so that they can kind of create a barrier for small companies to enter that space. Because anything that's regulated, think about the banking industry, it's heavily regulated. How many of your friends decide to open a bank? Very few, because it's too much regulated. Same with like all the sectors, pharmaceuticals. So what the AI companies or the private companies right now, speaking like OpenAI, maybe Google and others, they're trying to go to the government, go to Congress and say, hey, regulate. This is so dangerous, regulate. So they're using the fear and panic to push government to regulate this field. And as soon as governments start to regulate, they create barriers to entry so they can continue to dominate this industry. This is, again, part of my speech in that open source community. I think the people listening to us have to really think critically about this situation. I don't believe it's as scary as they are trying to portray it. Oh, it's the end of humanity. No, it's not. It's just a tool. It's a very useful tool, a very transformative tool, potentially job replacing tool to some jobs, but it's also going to create so many other jobs. So I'd like to send a message of let's not panic.
Well, I think this is a great statement to put out publicly, because people tend to be intimidated of what they don't know, right? A lot of people are not knowledgeable about AI technology tools and government regulations and systemic regulations and all of that. And we have to understand that the big companies, the Apples, the Microsofts, the HPs, the Dells, the Samsung, they own a lot of assets and they have a lot of power, while small startups don't have as much power. But if you think about it, the small startups and the private companies have more change management thinking. How do we change things? How do we modify? How do we break stereotypes? How do we go against the status quo? But that can be threatening to big corporations. So what does that mean to us? What does that mean to us change makers, other people trying to make change, diversifying portfolios, changing the way AI is? How do we work around the system in a way where we can protect ourselves, but at the same time make the change that we want to do, right? That could happen through collaboration, that could happen through public talks like the speech you gave, that could happen through the podcast we're doing right now. I mean, there's always risks. There's always risks. You're an entrepreneur, you discover something new, you create a new AI module and you put it out there. If it's booming and if it's, generating a lot of buzz, bigger companies are going to come for that, either want to sell you or want to own assets or want to regulate it or put it down so you don't have access to what they want, right? It's always a power play. It's always going to be a power play. The question is, are you willing to fight back or work around it, see how you can maintain your safety, however safety looks like? So this is the reality of the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, and for those listening right now, if you want to take action, if you want to join a community that can advocate for something like that. So I created an organization called singularitysyndicate.org. So this is a website that it's definitely going to be in the description of that episode somewhere. So I invite everyone to just click on there. There's like an email, a list basically that we're creating that will be a start of some advocacy work that we might be doing in the future alongside with a lot of other collaborators, perhaps with you as well, Jad, and many of the professors and intellectual and thought leaders that have been on the show. So singularitysyndicate.org is the website. So Jad, when it comes to these generative models, again, they become very good at generating human-like text. And at first, people will be like, oh, what's so big deal of text? But then when you dig deeper, I mean, figuring out how to predict the next word in the next sentence in the next paragraph is not just text. Language is the catalyst for everything. All human thoughts are represented in language. So once a machine is able to generate text, the impact of language is so profound. Like if someone walks to you and tells you something, it can trigger an emotional response from you. And now not only text, now we have images. And to top it all off, I'm sure you've heard of this new model called Sora that they haven't released yet, but they are showing its capabilities, that it can produce up to 1 minute of real looking
Video content, yeah.
video content. So when you think about all of that landscape, do you feel that we are heading to a utopia or a dystopia?
There's a lot of, I think we live in a world that's full of dramatics. We like to dramatize everything. The world, how is it going to become? We're going to be robots? Are we going to have chips in our head? Are our eyes going to turn red? Are we going to start flying with like robotic wings? Like, okay, as much as there is systemic technological improvement, there is a sense of human improvement as well that will never be lost. So I think we're heading into a world of improvement. You take a look back at like the last 10 years, how things have improved. We don't tend to see a lot of changes because we're just living every day and then we hear about something new happening. You get to pick and choose what you want. Where do you want to be? Where do you want to stay? And if we talk about the world, well, I mean, I don't know. When I was in Trinidad and Tobago, like a few months ago, I wasn't thinking about AI. Nobody was thinking about AI or technological advancement or what's happening. Everyone was enjoying the beach, the palm trees, the dancing. I was at a university with a professor talking about the history of an instrument and the history of the emancipation in Trinidad and Tobago. And that was what was caught up in, like, and they were strategizing on like how do we improve music performance and worldwide festivals. So they're in that mentality, for example. So it depends on the countries, depends on where we are.
Right.
This world is not binary. Also, I think we're heading into a technologically advanced country, but also a human-centric advance, and you decide in which environment you want to be or in what worlds you want to intersect with. But I definitely don't think we're going to be in like space or whatever, all that stuff, that imaginary dramatic. I don't think so. No.
With this, I'd like to thank you, Jad, for your appearance, and I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much, Naja. Appreciate it.